Hello everyone. As promised, we are finally onto part 3 of the Shamir of Solomon series. In this final video, we are going to describe the equipment required, the infrastructure required to cut rocks, say on top of a mountain, such as in ancient Peru, with what seems to be an ancient high-tech device called the Shamir. Now, it's been a few months since the last video, so let's recap. The Jewish Talmud is a collection of the wisdom and sermons of rabbis and other ancient knowledge. It claims the first Temple of Solomon was built with rocks cut from a distance. The stones were placed before the Shamir, and the Shamir cut them by gazing at them. In other legends, the Shamir is described as a worm or as a green rock that needs to be stored in a lead box, or it destroys everything around it. I don't see why ancient people would make up something like this, so I'm guessing it was once a real device. Couple this with the fact the ancients seem to have had some weird cutting technology. You put the two pieces together and I think we can say we're dealing with high-tech ancient civilization. They also had other weird technology such as the ARK of the Covenant. So let's get started and put it all together. In the previous video we described this Shamir of Solomon, and I suggested the Shamir was some primordial technological device, and it was not just nuclear, but maybe an enriched nuclear substance. Now, is that possible? The Shamir was described as green. Uranium ore is green to yellow, and indeed fluoresces green under black light. Uranium ore you can handle for short periods of time with no issue, but enriched uranium is something which you would really need to store in a lead box. It was said that the Shamir was stored in a lead-lined box. Now, this sounds so bizarrely scientific that I just don't know what to say. So if the ore was enriched, we are talking an ancient civilization with nuclear reactor technology. Is that even possible? I think the legend is just fragments of reality of a once much longer story. So, we are going to reconstruct that possibly former reality using all the ancient clues provided, hopefully. I think the following scenario may show how the rock splitting was done to carve these. But let's also look at a parallel legend, the Medusa legend, which seems to also describe the Shamir, but it calls it the Medusa. Now, Greece is also the home of a megalithic polygonal civilization far older than the classical Greeks. In the Greek Medusa legend, Perseus uses his mirrored shield to deflect the Medusa gaze, so he doesn't get turned to stone. Let us examine the elements of this story. Perseus holds a mirror. The Medusa casts stone-creating beams with an eye, a lens, thus focusing energy. The finished product, stone. It sounds strangely scientific, does it not? It sounds like the Shamir. Likewise, the Shamir was shown objects which it then carved. The ancient Hebrews were very careful to use words which conveyed the intended meaning. In the Talmud, the Shamir was shown a stone before carving it. Shown, as I pointed out before, implies the Shamir acted like an eyeball with a focus, which also implies lenses. So a laser device may have been involved to focus radiation with the Shamir as only one component, but what about the power supply? And in addition, the Shamir may have been very portable if it was going to carve things far away or on top of a mountain. And here's a problem. You can't just plug, say, a green piece of uranium into a laser. There needs to be an intermediary, a reactor, hopefully a portable one, possibly the ARK of the Covenant. This is a small container which, according to legend, held a tremendous power. And yet, the Shamir seems to be described as one singular device. So what's going on? So, I looked up Wikipedia to find something which fits the story, some piece of technology, and something which has both nuclear and laser in one device is in fact known as a nuclear pumped laser. It's still kind of under development. You see, in the 80s, the Star Wars program, Reagan wanted to shoot down possible Soviet missiles, and an X-ray laser was seen as the answer. But such a laser could only be driven by a nuclear reactor. It would be far more powerful than a conventional industrial laser, and it would be able, surely, to cut substances as rock very, very easily. But normal lasers can't really do that. Could it be that the stone-cutting Shamir was plugged into the reaction chamber of the Ark of the Covenant, which may have been the nuclear device it required to power it up to cut the rock? This then drove energy into the laser beam. This allowed for portability. So it could be taken to, say, an ancient site like this. So let's describe the setup. The cherubs on top of the ark maybe were inspired by insectoid antennae, sensitive to what is inside the box. I think they are a type of display. They indicate the condition of what is inside the box. They may have glowed with Cherenkov radiation, which is cyclotron radiation. That is radiation appearing around reactions, a bit like an aurora. The cherubs might start glowing with a radioactive halo, indicating the device was functioning. In addition, I think the ark would not have been made of gold, rather something similar but much lighter and electrically conductive, Orichalcum perhaps, a type of copper, allowing portability. The Bible writers did not mention Orichalcum because the Orichalcum mines became exhausted around 600 BC. If you look at the recently discovered Orichalcum ingots from about the time the mines ran out, you see they are shining like gold. Orichalcum may have been seen as a lighter version of gold. The Bible was written in Babylon from earlier texts around the 400s BC, so perhaps they no longer handled Orichalcum, so they wrote it out of the Bible, I believe, and therefore they said the ark was made of gold. And then you look at the capital of Atlantis. I think, like the ark, it describes a kind of containment device. Before, it served as a capital for more primitive later peoples. The Atlantic city had a triple metallic coating, copper gold or orichalcum, brass. This sounds like some sarcophagus storing a radioactive substance, a containment vessel, multi-layered metal. The canals cut to Atlantis, which reached the walled area, I think were formerly for import and export purposes, the way Western countries had canal networks before the invention of the railroad. In addition, this water may have cooled the reaction chambers in case of emergency. This entire infrastructure later crumbling and later hijacked by a more primitive people whose civilization was perhaps known as Atlantis is, I think, an interesting scenario. I think this infrastructure possibly still exists in ancient UK, underneath Stonehenge and Old Sarum, but who really knows where it is or if it still exists? I think the Atlantis infrastructure looks a lot like nuclear infrastructure. And I think the trucks and aircraft of this bygone era, well, were they nuclear powered? You will note that a portable nuclear device can power anything, planes, submarines. The Shamir may even have powered the fabled Vimana. Now, ancient texts wrote that Mercury is said to have powered the Vimana. Let's explain that. That's not quite right. Mercury is a silvery metal, but elemental mercury doesn't give you any power. Mercury is not a substance in alchemy. It's not elemental. It's actually a state of matter during a reaction. In alchemy, they always say mix the mercury and sulfur together, but they use the words mercury and sulfur for many different substances. So they're not elemental mercury and sulfur. So I think it actually means, and alchemists will explain this, it sort of means you mix the sun with the moon, or you mix the detonator with the fuel stock. That's what they mean by mercury and sulfur. Meanwhile, enriched plutonium or uranium has some of the dull metallic glow of mercury to it, and it gives tremendous power. Recall that Pumapunku is on top of a mountain. I made a video in the past based on Erich von Daniken's observations that Pumapunku has absolutely enormous stones, which Davidovits now say are geopolymer, which were apparently, it seems, dragged from 30 miles away and then up a mountain. Now, that's the archaeological version. The local natives, however, said that ancient gods flew in, built the stones in a day and a night, and flew out again. So we would be talking about a kind of Vimana. That sounds a little bit easier than trying to get up a mountain with no roads. In AD 120, a Greek mathematician living in the Alexandria Library, which was also a university, came up with the idea of a steam engine. The sphere begins to turn at incredibly high speed very fast. However, he had no use for this engine, so why did he make it? And that raises the question, did he make it? Did he invent it? Or did he simply make the easiest to make steam engine found in the now lost books in the Library of Alexandria? Trucks with the Heron steam engines, or more sophisticated engines, I think rode along the pre-Inca and pre-Roman roads which once spanned Europe and elsewhere. Many of these roads are now under the sea and are revealed in ley lines. And there are probably many more buried roads everywhere. The Romans, I think, simply resurrected those relevant to trade, and that is increasingly an accepted idea. This is how the rocks were cut out of the cliff in one piece and moved dozens of miles up a mountain, say to Pumapunku. These rocks were later recut by Stone Age peoples and quarriers, so maybe they do not always appear as good as they really are. In summary, all the pieces come together if you look at all the legends, and the conclusion is something really spectacular. Thanks for watching, everyone. These are only suggestions, but in order to be logically consistent, the people who say this can't have happened must also believe, with the same logic, that we can't now be flying aircraft around, we can't now have nuclear technology and lasers in our own time, because these developed out of a very primitive 18th and 19th century. I do have a Patreon if you'd like to help out. Thanks and have a great day. I hope you really enjoyed this. Cheers.